You know that warning that says, past performance doesn't guarantee future results. It's there for a reason, to keep us from confusing a lucky break with a solid plan. Honestly, we should probably bring that same level of healthy skepticism to the ballot box. Instead of getting swept up in flashy campaign ads or guaranteed success slogans, we need to take a hard look at what candidates have actually done. Think of it like buying stock. You wouldn't put your life savings into a company without checking their track record first. Choosing a leader is no different. We should verify their history before we trust them with our future. Like just about every president before him, Donald Trump is a huge fan of low interest rates. It makes sense. Cheap money acts like a caffeine shot, providing a quick boost to the economy that can drive up a leader's approval ratings. But lately, things have shifted from standard political pressure to an all-out war. In early 2026, Fed Chair Jerome Powell did something we've never seen. He went rogue and publicly slammed the administration. This all started after the DOJ launched a criminal probe into the Fed's headquarters renovation project. Powell didn't hold back, calling the investigation a total pretext, basically a move to bully the Fed into slashing rates. For a central bank that prides itself on staying out of politics, this was a massive gloves-off moment. Powell's logic? If the Fed starts taking orders from the Oval Office instead of following the actual economic data, the US dollar loses its credibility and we risk inflation spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, Wall Street has found a pretty snarky way to describe the strategic spontaneity strategy employed by this stable genius. After watching the president cycle through endless tariff changes in 2025, traders coined a new acronym, TACO. Trump always chickens out. Investors are now playing the taco trade. The bet is that if the market starts tanking because of this feud, the president will eventually blink and drop the DOJ investigation to avoid a total financial meltdown. It's essentially the same pattern they saw with his previous tariff threats. Talk big, stir up the markets, and then pull back when things get too shaky. We need to talk about why prices are still climbing, and it starts with tariffs. Think of a tariff as a direct tax on anything coming into the country. When a US company has to pay more to get goods across the border, they don't just eat that cost, they pass it on. That's why everything from your grocery haul to your new phone is getting pricier. We got a bit of a grace period in 2025 because businesses were selling off old stock they bought at lower prices. But those reserves are running dry. As we head further into 2026, those new, expensive shipments are arriving, and economists are bracing for a major spike in inflation. Right now, the Supreme Court is looking into whether these tariffs are even legal. They were rolled out using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a 1977 law meant for temporary national security crises. Critics are calling foul, arguing that the president is using a national emergency loophole to bypass Congress and permanently rewrite trade rules. The court has to decide, is this a valid use of executive power, or is it a massive overreach? There's also a push to lower interest rates by stripping the Federal Reserve of its independence. It sounds like a win for your mortgage, but it's actually a trap. If the Fed becomes a political tool, investors lose trust. When people expect inflation to spiral, long-term interest rates actually go up, making it even more expensive for the government to manage its debt. Things have taken a turn toward the extreme. We now have a president threatening to imprison the head of our central bank. That's the kind of move you see in dictatorial regimes like Russia or Venezuela, places where the economy usually collapses. If Jerome Powell is forced out, the U.S. risks being seen on the world stage as a tin-pot dictatorship. When a leader ignores the experts to manipulate the economy, it usually follows a predictable pattern. The power move. A leader ignores the experts and forces interest rates down for political points. Fiscal dominance. Instead of balancing jobs and inflation, the government treats interest rates like a monthly credit card bill they're trying to lower. The debt trap. By forcing rates down, Trump has mentioned a 1% goal. The government makes it cheaper to borrow money for tax cuts or big spending. The catch? When you use interest rates to fund the government instead of stabilizing the economy, inflation takes on a life of its own. You end up in a cycle where the interest rate needed to fix the mess keeps climbing, eventually leading to economic ruin. Ever wonder if a politician's swagger is actually backed by skill, and what truly motivates them? There's a clever trick to figure it out called the MICE framework, an acronym representing 4 key pressures: money, ideology, compromise, or coercion, ego. It was originally used by the CIA to figure out why people turn into double agents, but it works just as well for spotting a leader's weak points. Basically, it helps you see the specific pressure points that could lead a politician to sell out, mess up, or lose their way. When you look at leadership through the lens of MICE, it really boils down to one question: is this person here for us, or for themselves? If a leader is busier counting the money they've made in office than focusing on the people they serve, they've already failed the most basic test of public service. In leadership, having a toxic ego isn't just about being a big personality. It's more like a tipping point where a leader cares more about their own status than the people they're supposed to serve. Instead of keeping experts around who might challenge them, they surround themselves with yes men who just reflect their own opinions. When narcissism takes the wheel, you end up in this dangerous loop where looking good matters more than actually doing the job right. There's a massive irony in Trump's quest for a Nobel Peace Prize. He's built his entire brand on being the outsider who fights the elite, but psychologically, he craves the ultimate validation that only they can provide. He wants a thumbs up from the very people he claims to despise. After Maria Corina Machado, instead of Trump, won the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize, the White House went on the offensive, claiming Norway was playing favorites and choosing politics over peace. If you look at Donald Trump's long history with Jeffrey Epstein through the lens of the MICE framework, money, ideology, compromise, and ego, the connection becomes a lot more than just a headline. It's a case study in how toxic influence works. The public isn't just curious anymore, they're demanding answers. That demand for transparency is actually starting to overshadow the usual cult of personality we see around Trump. It's creating this intense friction between his past misconduct and the mighty loyalty of the MAGA movement. The big question that isn't going away is this. Given how deep their history goes, would Trump be willing to trade the country's future just to keep his past with Epstein under wraps? Ever heard of the prosperity gospel? You might know it as prosperity theology or the word of faith movement. Essentially, it's the controversial idea that God wants every believer to be rich and perfectly healthy. Here's the breakdown of how it's supposed to work. The seed strategy. It teaches that if you have enough faith and sow a seed, which is usually code for donating money to a ministry, God is basically obligated to pay you back with even more money and success. The contract. In this world, the Bible is treated like a legal contract. If you do your part through faith and positive confession, only saying positive things, God has to hold up his end of the deal. The influence. This mindset has some famous ties. Donald Trump was heavily influenced by Norman Vincent Peale, the guy who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking, and has kept prosperity preachers like Paula White in his inner circle for years. The catch? While it sounds great on paper, traditional theologians aren't fans. Many of them argue that this movement is really just a way to dress up plain old greed in a spiritual outfit. If you want to see two totally opposite ends of the religious spectrum, look no further than the flying spaghetti monster and the prosperity gospel. On one hand, you have a satirical deity made of pasta. On the other, you have a belief system that basically says the more you believe, the richer you'll get. Even though it sounds like a joke, Pastafarianism actually has a point. It's a parody used to poke fun at how religion and power mix, specifically calling out money-centered worship as a bit of a red flag. It wasn't just a random internet meme, either. It started back in 2005 when a guy named Bobby Henderson wanted to protest the teaching of intelligent design in Kansas schools. Since then, the FSM has grown from a simple protest into a way for people to talk about legal definitions, what actually counts as a religion, critical thinking, questioning why we believe what we believe, social critique, challenging the influence of wealth and faith. One of the best things about religion is how it keeps your ego in check. It kind of forces you to stop and ask, am I doing this for me or for something bigger? Having that sense of accountability really helps you catch yourself before a bad impulse turns into a toxic attitude. Think of faith as a helpful gut check for the modern world. It's like having a second opinion in your head that reminds you to slow down when life gets too materialistic or selfish. When we shift our focus toward taking care of others rather than just looking out for ourselves, our whole perspective changes. Instead of just worrying about the next week or month, we start looking at things through a trillion-year lens. When you're looking at forever, those short-term wins that come at someone else's expense suddenly don't seem worth it anymore. Materialism is basically a way of looking at the world where stuff comes first. We've all heard the warnings, whether from religion or just common sense, that chasing physical comfort can get in the way of what really matters, like our relationships or our inner peace. The real trap is when we stop using objects as tools and start using them to define who we are or how successful we feel. To break out of that cycle, we have to get honest about the difference between a need and a want. Materialism is sneaky. It tries to blur that line, making us feel like we need luxury items just to fit in or feel okay. Ever heard of the survival rule of threes? It's basically the ultimate cheat sheet for staying alive when things go sideways. Instead of panicking or guessing what to do first, this rule helps you prioritize exactly what your body needs to survive an emergency. It's a sobering look at just how fast the clock starts ticking when you're stripped of the basics. Have you ever heard of the Hug a Tree and Survive program? It's a famous survival course used all over the world to teach kids what to do if they ever get lost in the woods. The program actually has a pretty heartbreaking origin story. Back in 1981, a 9-year-old boy named Jimmy Beveridge went missing in Palomar Mountain State Park in California. Even though there was a massive search party looking for him, they sadly didn't find him in time. After that tragedy, two men, Ub Taylor, a legendary Border Patrol tracker, and Tom Jacobs, a search and rescue volunteer, teamed up to make sure it never happened again. They realized that when kids get lost, they often panic. They might wander even further away, or, even worse, try to hide from searchers because they're scared. Ub and Tom developed a simple, easy-to-remember set of rules to help kids stay calm, stay put, and help rescuers find them fast. Think of a feedback loop like a conversation that feeds on itself. It's a process where the result of an action circles back to become the cause of the next one. Sometimes this keeps things steady, But other times, it acts like a megaphone, making a small signal louder and louder until it's all you can hear. In a survival situation, whether it's a person lost in the wilderness or an entire planet trying to stretch its resources, these loops are what decide if a system stays stable or spins out of control. When things start to feel like they're spinning out of control, it's only natural to feel overwhelmed. Usually, we're told that anxiety or depression are glitches in our brains that need to be fixed with a prescription or a therapy session. But collapse psychology looks at it differently. It suggests that if the world around us, the climate, the economy, the very way we live, is actually breaking down, then feeling a sense of dread isn't a disorder. It's actually a perfectly sane reaction to what's happening. You aren't broken, you're just paying attention. It's one thing to feel like the future is looking a bit bleak, but it's another thing entirely when you feel like there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. That sense of powerlessness is exactly what fuels the dire future mindset. It's a loop of constant anxiety that many have felt in their gut for years, even if they couldn't quite put it into words. At least not until Jonathan Haidt laid it all out in The Anxious Generation. To break that cycle and help kids feel like they're actually in the driver's seat of their own lives again, Haidt suggests 4 pretty straightforward ground rules. No smartphones until high school. Switch out the addictive screens for basic dumb phones that just handle calls and texts. No social media before 16. Give their brains a chance to develop before they're hit with the pressure of algorithms and likes. Phone-free schools. Use lockers or pouches to keep phones out of sight from the first bell to the last. Bring back free play. Let kids play outside without constant supervision so they can learn independence and how to navigate the real world on their own. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt argues that we've swapped out real-world play for virtual world scrolling, and the results have been pretty disastrous for kids' mental health. At the heart of his argument is a surprising hero. The dangerous playground. You know the ones, those old-school metal jungle gyms, towering slides, and swings that went a little too high. As it turns out, those weren't just toys. They were essential tools for growing up. Haidt's key insight is that kids are anti-fragile. Think of it like your immune system. If you never encounter a germ, your body never learns how to fight. A child's mind works the same way. It actually needs stressors and risks to get strong. If we protect kids from every possible scratch or scraped knee, we're basically breaking their internal compass for danger before it even has a chance to calibrate. Climbing a shaky ladder isn't just exercise. It's actually a form of natural exposure therapy. Here's how it works. Facing the fear. A kid stands at the top of a steep slide and feels that rush of, oh no, this is high. Taking the leap. By choosing to go down anyway, they learn how to regulate that fear. Building mastery. They realize, hey, I was scared, I did it, and I'm okay. That realization builds risk competence, the ability to tell the difference between a fun challenge, climbing a tree, and a life-threatening mistake. Since the 1980s, we've entered an era of safetyism. We ripped out the asphalt, lowered the swings, and covered everything in thick rubber mulch. We definitely saw fewer broken arms, but Haidt thinks we traded them for something worse, a surge in anxiety. By making playgrounds perfectly safe, we created a safety paradox. When we remove every physical risk, we also take away the chance for kids to solve their own problems or learn their own limits. We're sending them into a messy, unpredictable world without any of the mental calluses they need to survive and thrive. In her book Miseducation, Katie Worth points out a pretty unsettling reality. A massive, behind-the-scenes web of influence has essentially blindsided everyone from old politicians to young students when it comes to climate change. Interestingly, this happens because of a weird glitch in human psychology. We tend to gravitate towards someone who sounds super confident, even if they have no idea what they're talking about, rather than an actual expert who is honest about the complexities and uncertainties of science. Why do we fall for it? The MICE framework. Money. To protect their bottom line, big corporations fund specific agendas. Ideology. Our own political or social bubbles that tint how we see the facts. Compromise, or coercion, teachers and officials feeling pressure to water down the truth just to avoid rocking the boat. Ego, that human need to protect our reputation or stick to how things have always been. The bottom line. Between corporate lobbying and fear-based political messaging, we've developed a national blind spot. This isn't just a simple schooling problem. It's a self-destructive habit that puts our future security at risk. By choosing the comfort of a confident lie over the complexity of the truth, we're essentially sabotaging ourselves.